Hey there, BJ. We're back at it again.
Good morning, Steve. Yeah, good. Good morning. Nice to talk with you.
Sorry to be off for a bit. If you're wondering why we were gone for a couple weeks, that's on me. I had a little bit of fun stuff going on the family side, which we got all straightened away for the moment. And BJ's been probably coaching. You've been getting started too, right? For your spring season.
Yeah, UW Green Bay has started their spring season. We're a couple weeks in. We had our first, we can't call it a scrimmage. We had a play date yesterday with three teams of players made up of Division III schools. Um, they have different restrictions than we do, so they can't bring their coaches, they can't bring their full teams. So we had yesterday a good day in the gym with four teams and everybody playing their spring rosters. So it's all new. We're all missing a couple of seniors and looking for the next player that's going to jump in.
Nice. Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, we had we talked in the before we got together. We had ours and similar, just kind of figuring it out and figuring out all kinds of things, academics and everything. But it's great to get started and get in the gym. I got to meet a couple of coaches who I didn't know, so it was always nice to have get some new blood, see a new. Actually, one of the programs is brand new boys program, so I'm really happy for them. They got started and their coach got the job by going in and pitching, hey, you should have a boys program. Here's my plan to do it. And the AD was like, oh, all right. So, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Well, anyway, let's get into our guest. Last time, our guest got me to change how I have my boys communicate on court. So, I'm expecting I'm going to learn some new stuff to bring to the gym this time around. Among them, overhand passing philosophy that we just discussed a little bit ago. So, let's get them in here.
Hey,
Hey guys, how
Jim.
you doing?
Doing great.
How's life in the Great White North, BJ?
We're getting out of the deep freeze. We had a couple of weeks where almost every day we were below zero, at least part of the day. So the dog is starting to want to spend more time outside, not running in right away. It's it's pretty good. It's white. We just got 6 inches of snow, so everything looks real nice and crisp and clean out there.
I was gonna say Wednesday we had 70-degree weather, and yesterday we had 6 inches of snow, or probably 8 inches. This is a lot of snow. It's a pretty good amount on the ground right now, so it's a good time.
So I wanted to. My motivation for talking about rule changes is twofold. One, NCAA volleyball is tinkering with a rule that hasn't been this way for I think almost 100 years, where double contacts on your side of the net. Uh, at least this spring, we're going to experiment with allowing the setter, so the second contact or the first contact, which we've always had, but allowing a second contact to use a double attack as well. But and that's in the short term. In the long term, we often hear from coaches, I want to go back to the old rules. I want to go back to how we used to play. It was better when we did this. And I read that a lot in volleyball coaches and trainers. I read it more often in another Facebook group, Old School Volleyball, which is a great place. And everybody wants to go back to a certain set of rules. And as as I started researching rule changes, we've changed a lot of rules. The rules have changed. The game would almost be unrecognizable for William G. Morgan, the inventor of the game. It would be very different for him. So I guess my first question to you guys is, what are the major rule changes that you remember in your lifetime? And how did you feel about them when you heard it was going to change? And how do you like them now?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting question. When we started talking about this, I came up with a list of all of them. I'm going to start with one, which is not the most impactful, but I love it and I hope it stays, which is the COVID rule change of not changing sides. That's amazing. I think we should stay in our same sides of the nets forever, which is just fantastic. When we talk about impactful rules, I think the two biggest that I could really think about was changing from side out scoring to rally scoring, and then the addition of the libero. So the change from side out to rally was super interesting because it took games that could go forever. I mean, you would have 3-hour matches back then, and those are 3-set matches. Those weren't even full 5-set matches. Um, uh, and it took it to where it was a more manageable time frame where there's a lot more impact being driven into every play because every play was now worth something. So that was actually uh, I like that one. I actually like that one a lot because it made the game just much better, much faster, and especially now when you look at the game today with the side out percentages that the men's teams have. My God, if we were playing side out scoring, those games would be forever, just absolutely forever. And then the other one was libero, and I think this had an overall impact. I don't know how much it was defensively, but certainly offensively. And we always think it changed 2 positions, but it actually probably changed 3 positions pretty heavily, right? So back in the days before liberos, and I'm speaking probably a little bit more specifically about men and international when you only have the 6 subs and the 1 entry rule. The game was played with 2 good passers, and obviously generalizing, 2 good passers, which is your outsides, and then the third passer would fill in, which is usually your right side. And then your middles, typically you hide them, put them in a corner, try to get them away from serve receive. But with the addition of the libero, that took 2 players or 3 players that were ancillary passers, and it took them where they no longer need to pass, right? So now all of a sudden you have an advent of middles that had to be far more well-rounded to they could focus on one thing. And I'll be honest, the right side over the last 20 years since was it 96 when Stanley just went nuts. I know he was a little bit later than that, but it was just that time
Later.
frame in the
Yeah.
late
2000,
90s
2008.
when the libero started coming in that the opposite position just took off because that opposite no longer needed to pass either. So now you have 3 players that are all they're doing is offense. So it had a huge impact on the game offensively, which I think is interesting considering it's a defensive player.
The player heights changed as well with libero, and I
Yeah.
think that was, and we'll get into this with the new rule too, with the double contact rule. It was an unintended consequence that we were going to see middles grow. Craig Buck was 6'7", and he was considered very tall at the time for a middle attacker. And now, there are multiple middles that are over 7 feet. It allowed for those players to not have to have that same level of coordination. Not that they couldn't, they could at 7 feet, but they just typically don't.
It's funny
So
though when you think about that,
that
because
was
as that's
interesting to me.
evolved, yeah, as it's evolved over the last few years, certainly, I think we've gone away from the real big middles a lot, right? So especially in the women's game, our middles aren't our biggest players, and they haven't been for a couple of years. That's usually our outsides are certainly getting a lot bigger, right? Outsides back, 20 years ago, they were averaging 5'10", 6 feet. Now you're starting to look at outsides that are averaging 6'2", in the women's game. In the men's game, those numbers are skyrocketing, right? You're looking at they were going from 6'2", 6'3", Now you see the predominant outsides in the world. What's Matt Anderson, 6'10"? You're starting to see those guys as the much bigger, more dominant players, and the middles are starting to look a little bit smaller. They're still 6'7", 6'8". Small being relative, of course. That's obviously not a small person. So it's just interesting to see how it is and how the game has evolved, certainly from that, all from a position of people that are filled by guys that are, usually 5'10" to 6'1". So it's been an interesting change.
Yeah, it's I'm going to bring the perspective of the beginning lower level coach in here just for a minute for coaches who are thinking about who do I play where. And again, every coach has a different kind of take on things. My most recent take is I want now I'm dealing with a group, I've got 23, 24 guys in my program. 14 of them probably have not played before. And this is looking at varsity and JV at high school level. And my criterion, and be interested in hearing from other coaches about what they think, but I want a more mobile, athletic, quick, heights like number 3 or 4 on my list for a middle at this point. As long as you got to be able to block, but I would rather have, in fact, my 2 setters are very athletic. I actually started running them at middle in the front row. It's really confusing to the new guys. You're a middle. Okay, where's your base in the front row? Right back. Where's your base in the right front, rather? What's your base in the back row? Left back. It's like, why do you call me a middle? I'm like, I don't know. So, but so it's interesting for them to kind of learn all of that. Somewhat confusing terminology. I got to work on that some, but it's one of those things where if you got a big slow guy, and that's I think one of the things you're seeing at the high levels. If you're big and quick, if you're a 7-footer who can really close that block and read well, you're probably playing middle. But if you're a little bit slower, you're probably playing next to a 6'10" guy who's a little quicker, a little more athletic, and you're the two things. You're the good blocker on that side, but you also hopefully have a great back row attack. I remember seeing Stanley being the first one, but it's at my level, it's you can either feature or hide somebody at right front. I spend probably half my time hiding them, but that's okay. It gets some touches, brings them along. But yes, I would love to be featuring somebody at right side once we get a little more skill and experience on my side. So just to balance it out, because you guys are talking about a wealth of riches that I am never going to see.
Well, I'll be honest, even at our level at Division II, our middles are that. We're far more concerned with their ability to block, right? Because their offensive ability of a middle is limited by so many other things. You could be the greatest offensive middle, but you're going to get limited by serve receive. You're going to get limited by how well you can dig the ball close to a net so you can run the middle effectively. So I try not to get too hung up on that offensively. If we can get enough of a threat that they need to hold there in middle in order to be able to run something, then we can be super effective with our pins, even if they're just holding. And it was Sean Byron, who's now over at Marist. And at the time, he was I think he was the associate head men's coach at Ohio State. Him and I were talking one day about offense, and he basically said, it's not that hard. You chuck it up there. Your goal is you have 4 attackers. They have 3 blockers. Figure out your matchup. And that's it. And when you start thinking about it that way, it becomes super simple, right? How do you work 30 feet of the net? And then how do you figure out how to put pressure on the blockers on the other side by utilizing what you have? And I think trying to focus too heavily on middles, and that's one of the things that I see a lot, is coaches like, oh, this kid's, big athletic kid, I'm going to throw him in middle. And all you're doing is taking away swings from a big athletic kid. And that's just not a great way to succeed, right? If I have a big athletic kid who could put the ball away from anywhere, I want to be able to feature them and get them as many swings as humanly possible.
Let's guide back towards rule changes.
Sorry.
Well, why is it that we change the rules? Why? No, that's all right. Why why is it that we change the rules? What is it that makes us want to switch a rule? Why do we do it? What's the purpose of it?
Well, and I'm going to speak out of something that I don't know. I'm going to make an assumption here. I think at some point, somebody high enough up in FIVB or somebody high enough up in USA basically said, we need to make this so it's more watchable on TV. Old school volleyball, where you're doing side out and the game was 3 hours long, nobody would watch that on TV, right? Nobody would put that on because the game would be 3 hours. You didn't have enough viewership to sustain it. And it just became too hard to watch. You know, you think about I think it was the AVP back when I was growing up. They used to have the clock on in side out scoring, right? So anytime the ball was in play, the clock was running, or not side out scoring. I'm sorry. So it just at least kept the game flowing. So I think that was certainly in the going from side out to rally. That was a big part of it. And then I think a lot of the other changes, when you start looking at these things, honestly, how does it make sense for people who aren't volleyball players? Right. So I started making a list of some of the things that have happened, some of the rule changes that have happened. Right. So serving from the entire baseline, double contacting the first ball, let serves counting, center line violations. This one's a ridiculous one, but allowing players to wear jewelry now. Like these are all things that are rule changes that really a person looking out from the outside, if you told them all of those things, they would look at the game and be like, what? That doesn't make sense. Why are we doing that? So I think there's some of that that allows the game just to flow a lot better, right? This game just flows so much smoother than it did even back when I was in college in the late 90s. So I think that's a big chunk of it. So that's,
Yeah.
I don't know, that's my opinion
Yeah,
on
that's
it.
for sure.
Right, wrong, or indifferent, but that's kind of what I think.
You know, I got one that just came to mind because. Oh, go ahead, BJ.
We must have a bad delay today.
Yes.
It possibly.
With yeah, I can say for sure the side out scoring, switching from side out to rally. I've talked with John Kessel about this. He was instrumental in helping to make that change. And it's what Jim said. It was, and a little bit more even, it was to make the day more predictable. At a nationals event where there are going to be 10 matches on a court in a day, it became really hard to control what courts were going long. It might be 1 or 2 in the morning that they're still playing volleyball, when now I think the latest matches are ending, 10:30. You might get one court that goes rogue, but for the most part, the day and certainly the time on TV is another consideration, but it's a lot more predictable, and I think that helped. The rest of them, I think a lot of the other ones, and certainly over the past 20 years, Jim, the things that you mentioned, I think a lot of that is, like you said, to let the game flow more, to take the referees more out of the game and to judge less, and just to let the game happen.
It's funny with the change from the side out to rally scoring. The one thing I wish they actually changed also, and this is probably going to be kind of an unpopular opinion. If you think about overtime in volleyball, right? That fifth set, which is the overtime, 2 people were tied after the 4 quarters. In the old days, when you were playing side out scoring, those 4 sets probably took a really long time. You're talking, it probably took every bit of 2.5, 3 hours. Today, those 4 sets are going to take under 2 hours. You're probably looking at 1 hour and 45 minutes. So you're gonna fly through those pretty quick. And then that the fifth set back in the day felt like it was lightning fast, because you'd be playing 45, 50-minute long sets, and then all of a sudden you're now playing your overtime, which felt like it was 30 seconds because it would take 10, 15 minutes to complete that set. I think with the rule change, when we went to side out scoring with no changes to that fifth set, there's not as much pressure. There's not as much feeling of we need to get this over quickly because you do have time. You have time to give up a run and then be able to come back from it in that fifth set. I would actually, again, I'm sure this is not going to be the most popular opinion, but I'd actually like to see that fifth set get shortened a little bit. Maybe pull it to 11 so that there really is that pressure. You don't have the option. You give up a run, you're done. Um, I would like to see it more of a difference between the regular sets and then the overtime set. So that's something I think for me I would like to see, but just to put that urgency
A
back.
couple of years ago, they were talking about going to, we were going to play 4 out of 7 to 15. And they
They
experimented some of
tried that, didn't they?
the same idea.
Yeah, they tried that internationally
Yeah.
at like the youth level, I thought, which again, interesting, but I don't know. Most of it, and you look at most of these rules, like I said, it really does things to make things and make the game better and make the game faster. And I don't know. In a lot of ways, I think it's a lot more enjoyable of it. So I don't know. There's not a whole lot of rule changes that have come up recently that I'm like, man, that is terrible. The only one, actually, I came up with one that when they made that change, I did not like, which was the center line violation. And that was really more from, I'm going to call it anecdotal safety. I know they did boatloads of studies that it didn't have a huge impact on injury rates. But just, I don't know, something about that when you used to see kids come screaming under the net and it wasn't anything. That was the only rule that we made that I was just like, man, this is not great. This is not a solid
Yeah.
plan, but
Yeah, I think I see it at the inexperienced level. So I get these new guys in the gym, and those are the guys who are flying underneath the net. And I don't know that they studied it at beginning player levels, but I guarantee you, there's plenty of sprained ankles and that sort of thing that come out of that. And so it's a little silly, I think, in some respects, and it would force you to train off the net, which would actually improve the beginning part of the game. Because I'm constantly trying to break guys of, hey, hitting a ball in the plane of the net is not going to work very well for you when there's a block up there. So let's play 3 feet off the net, guys. Watch the high level. That's where they play. But it takes years. I would bet you guys do a fair amount of untraining of that with brand new players. Or let players that come in as a freshman level. And don't come from really high level, but are still good athletes. They're still too tight. So I would definitely change that. And then, could we just take the screening rule out? Because you're just going to debate it. It's never going to get called. It's like, and I know there was stuff this week, but I'm just looking at it going, yeah, get over it. Yes, they do that. And is it the most sportsmanlike? I don't know. It's allowed, and they know they can do it. And, you see all kinds of different stacks. Or just get on the other side of the net, figure out a way to get the thing up and, go from there.
I actually got asked a question about screening yesterday, and my basic premise was it is so hard for a screen to actually qualify for a screen. Don't even worry about it.
Yeah.
Because it needs to be, low, fast, driven right over the top of the block. And if you're thinking about it that hard, man, just take a step to your left or right or stand upright. Just there's so many ways you can get around it without it being a problem. So I don't know. That's a good one. That would be a good one to get rid of. I think people would start being a lot more creative with it.
What are the unintended consequences going to be for this extended double contact rule? The rule is we can have a double contact on our side of the net. We cannot send a double contact over the net. So who is that going to benefit and who's it going to hurt?
That's a good question. So I'll start with the place where I think it's going to be an unintended consequence. which is it's going to make the job much harder for referees because from a standpoint of coaches, all I care about for doubles is I just want to know what's going to be called. I just want a consistency level of what's going to be called. I don't care if it's tight or loose, doesn't make any difference to me. Just make it so that I know what's going to happen during a game. That is going to be almost impossible to have happen now if we stick down that path, right? Because you're going to be able to double in your own side, but then how bad does the double need to be when it goes over to the other side of the net? And there are doubles, and we've all seen it, that just get chunked over to the other side of the net, and the ref lets it go. Whatever. As long as we know what it is, we can live with it. And I think that is going to be a consequence. I actually think it's going to put more pressure on the ref as opposed to taking it off, because now you're going to be getting yelled at on doubles far more significantly. I think the neat thing about it is where we're going to get hurt less on it is when somebody other than the setter sets. I would speculate most setters are still probably going to be really good setters, going to be pretty clean, not going to have a whole lot of doubles, because everybody says there's no advantage to doubling. I don't particularly believe that, because if I have a good setter and you have a bad setter, that's an advantage to me. So you should be called every single time, and I should be called every single time. You'll just get called 5 times as much as me. But when you think about setter digging the ball, and now all of a sudden the middles can be chucking up a set, or a right side might be chucking up a set that might not be as good as you would see coming out of a setter, and those aren't going to be as called as often. So I think that's a good benefit to it. But I really do think the biggest unintended consequence is going to be the balls going over the net are not going to be called as frequently. And we won't know as coaches what those are going to be called like during a match. It's too hard to set a precedent.
Yeah, if getting rid of them is getting rid of half of them.
Go ahead, Steve.
No, but you basically said, oh, we're going to split the baby here, and we're going to get rid of half of them, and let the other half, and yeah, for a ref, that's like, well, that's a big help. So I kind of look at it and go, I actually, one of the things that's done for me at my level is I spend a fair amount of time at the beginning of these things going, guys, because I see at my level, the boys, there'll be a ball coming to them. They'll be a little bit unsure of it, and they'll throw their hands at the ball, and they're going to get called. I know they're going to get called, all but my setters, and even my setters at times. So, I'm training them. I'm like, look, if that ball's above your head, hit it with one hand. Just learn to hit a down ball, which is, we look at it and go, oh, down ball, that's easy. Well, not when you're a beginning player. But I'm like, guys, you can't get called for a double with one hand, so find a way to hit it with one hand. And, that's something that is born of getting double calls on inexperienced players. So for you guys, that's not quite as big a deal, but to your point, Jim, for that right side who's got to chuck a ball up, they probably would, I won't say how frequently, but they'll get called occasionally for a double because they're just not skilled. That'll go away. But then, my guys are dumping balls over with two hands all the time. So for, if that rule were at the high school level, which it's not, that would definitely cause some challenges for the refs. And, I've given up. I tell my guys, hey, don't worry about double calls. Whatever the call is, just go with it. We're not reffing this. The ref's going to do what the ref's going to do. And if we let it get in our head, it's going to take away from our game. If the other coach is screaming about doubles and all that, let him scream. If the other, I don't even debate him anymore. Every now and then I'll be sitting on the bench and I'll just go like that, and he'll go, yep. And I'm like, I'm fine. Let's go. But I see other behavior at times from other coaches and benches. So
I think the place where it's going to change is the good setters are going to get better. If you're a good setter, you've got all these little tricks to change the timing or to tee a ball up, or whether you're ducking a little lower, reaching a little higher, getting to a ball faster or later. They're going to have just one more little trick in their arsenal where they can get away with a little bit of a double. And I think a lot of them are still going to be able to locate a ball fairly well. with that double contact.
Mhm.
Whereas, like what Jim was talking about, is there an advantage, if a middle blocker goes up and hits a double, they're probably not locating it all that well. But I think the setters,
Right.
the good ones, are going to get better.
I'll take my setter getting called doubles on all of her sets because her doubles are usually still pretty good. I'm sure yours are too. I mean, those are still very hittable sets.
Yes.
So I don't know. I just don't think I don't think it'll do what they want it to do. I think it's going to make the game look ugly and messy. And again, for the spectators, does it make sense to somebody who's just watching? And the answer is going to be no, because you're getting rid of 50% of something. That doesn't make sense.
How about how do you guys feel about replay? That was probably the other major rule change that's happened in my lifetime, besides in '98 when we went to libero and rally score. That's coming along. We've had replay now for a few years. How much has that changed the game? Is it better or worse? What do you think about that?
So it's tough, right? Because we don't have replay at our level. We do have it available, but the cost for the equipment is so high. There are so few programs who can actually have it in place. The one thing I don't like is you lose them if you're right. Like if you get it right, you should be able to keep all of your challenges. You should be able to challenge as many as you want as long as you're right. That being said, you're still talking about, let's say it's two out of 50 points. I don't know how much that's going to have an impact overall, but I like it. I think the other thing that I have seen coming out of replay, and this is, again, anecdotal, is I've noticed a lot more games that are being broadcast on ESPNU now because they're looking for the cameras. So ESPN is in a lot of different gyms. Again, not with a crew, but they're certainly there with cameras to be able to broadcast the game, to be able to make the game more popular. And I think that's an unintended consequence. That's not a consequence. That's a great consequence, or a great thing. I don't know. I in general like it. We've all seen, oh gosh, what was that call? It was a few years ago, the national championships, when I think it was against Penn State.
Yeah.
The ball was in by like 4 feet, and the dude, who knows, froze, called it out, and it was clearly in. No replay, and it's over. That's I don't know. I like it from that standpoint. I wish we had it in more gyms. I wish we had it at more levels.
The replay rule is going to get experimented with at Division I this year, and it's going to be closer to what you said. You get 2 challenges at the beginning of the match, and you can challenge as many times as you want, so long as you're not wrong. If you get one wrong, you lose the challenge. If you get it right, you get to keep your challenges. So that will be interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's the way it should be, especially at matches when you have paid officials. So you're talking Division I, you're talking 4 paid officials, the R1, R2, L1, L2, all paid. As you start getting lower, and I'm probably giving a cop-out here, but as you start getting into student workers doing lines, or volunteers, or parents in high school, or things along those lines, I actually don't think you should have replay. I don't want people sitting there and being able to heckle a parent because they got a call wrong, when they're volunteering their time or things like that, right? So at a level where people are paid, I'm sorry, if you're paid to do a job, be as good as you can be at it, but you also need to understand you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And we're just going to fix it. And we move on. BJ, you and I saw it at VNL with those things in replay. It was exciting. It's exciting in the arena as you're waiting for a replay to come up, because half the gym is expecting one thing, the other half is wanting something else, and it's just an exciting 30 seconds or a minute.
Yeah, I think we'll
The
get to.
FIVB is much, much better.
Yeah, I think we'll get to the point, technology-wise, where the lines won't be an issue anymore. They'll be called automated immediately. It's going to be a while, but the technology is there to trickle it pretty far down. I think the replay on touches, blocking touches, and all of that stuff, that'll probably still need to be used to really good quality slow motion, and that'll probably stay around for a while. But I think there'll be both a technology capability and an incentive to get the lines immediate, so that there's not that much delay. And to your point earlier, that it works better for TV.
Well, tennis does it currently, right? It was called I forget what their system is called, but tennis in a lot of tournaments, the lines are called automated now.
Yeah.
If it's out, I think it rings or something along those lines. But it's a pretty neat and instant system.
Yeah, I think the other out of bounds, that it might be actually, the pins might be something that need a little bit of work, but then sensing technology for over the pins is probably available as well. Although there'll be more expensive pins, so we'll have to see what happens with that.
Well, so that's how tennis gets around it, right? Tennis, the ball doesn't actually need to go over the net; it can go from around the net.
Yeah.
So if the ball goes outside the poles, you can hit it in from outside the pole into the opponent's court, which that would make volleyball exciting, man. I mean, talk about having to defend something crazy. So
yeah. Oh, there you go. New rule change.
The rules were like that.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, the original rules had that. There were no pins, and you could hit it in from anywhere. I don't know if anybody that's listening in enjoys the history of our game, but I had pulled up the original rules of volleyball. The game is completely different. It used to be based on innings. We played 9 innings like a baseball game, and you got up to 3 servers per inning. The net was only 6'6". You could touch the ball as many times as you wanted in a row or on your team. So you could air dribble the ball by setting it and set yourself up into a position to play. And the number of players was less restrictive. And, the game that was invented, and this is always my argument for people that say we should never change the rules. Well, we changed the rules to fit the society of the day. The game is 125 years old now. The rules that fit in 1895 are nowhere near appropriate for 2021, 2022. So I think that's the driving force for changing the rules, is to fit the technology and to fit what the players and what the viewers want out of the game. That's why things change. And certainly the NFL changes a lot of things for safety. I think baseball isn't so much about safety, but they're more a little bit technology driven. I feel like basketball is more viewership driven. NBA basketball in the US is more about the viewership, much more like volleyball is. I think that's maybe the game that changes the most, similarly to volleyball. But I don't know. I mean, generally it's good. My question for you guys would be, what are the rules you would like to see changed? What are the next changes that we should be making?
Oh, man. I think the biggest thing I'd like to see is a more consistent rule set. And that's not necessarily an individual rule, but just things as separately as subs, right? There are multiple different rule sets for subs, which change the dynamic of your game entirely, right? So you have international Division I, Division II men. You're talking 6 subs, single entry. USAV club, you're talking 12. College for women And Division 3 men, I believe, also use 15 subs. And then Federation, you have 18 subs. And that all of those things just change the game dramatically, right? So you're talking, you can run through a 6-2, a full 6-2 with an additional sub defending, pulling out a right side or another outside who maybe isn't as good of a passer. If you're doing that in Federation rules, you can get through 3 full rotations before you run out. The game you'll never run out of subs. You'll have plenty to get through every game. But if you try that in college, you only get 2.5 subs. You will run out sometimes. Try that in high school, you're only going to get through 2 rotations. Or in high school, I'm sorry, in club, you're only going to get through 2 rotations. So you will run out, not sometimes, frequently. And then obviously in international and for men, you can't do that. So it just changes the strategy based on having crazily different sub numbers. So that's something I'd like to see us just get more in line with, so that it was kind of there. I'd actually also like to see the men's net raised a little bit, probably the women's net as well. The game is played at just such a far more vertical level than it was in the past. You know, I think if you raise the net even 2 inches, that's just going to have a dramatic impact on what's going to happen and make it a little bit easier to defend, a little bit easier to have the game go on longer. So, and I think for the men especially, it'll take out some of the back row attack options. Won't take them out. It'll make it a little bit more difficult to drive the ball, a back row attack down in front of a back row defender. So I think that's probably the one I would want to see change the most.
The challenge for me there would be that, you know, at what level? And do you proliferate net heights? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. For example, I think, you know, I know at the really younger levels we can have a lower net, but, you know, that video that USAV did years ago with the cadre, the staff at playing on the beach with the nets that are scaled to what it would look like to play as an adult, and they couldn't even get the ball over the net. And I thought that was a good illustration of the challenge that a 10-year-old has playing this game. So, you know, certainly at high school level, there are, and at club level up to 18s, there are programs, especially at the club level, that, you know, would benefit from a higher net. Maybe it's 17s and 18s kind of thing to make that transition to a higher college net or a higher pro net. I don't think that's a bad idea. I think it would make the lower levels of the sport really difficult. And you know, for the average player. So we'd have to figure that out. But my guess is it would cascade that way. There would be a jump at some level, probably past high school for a higher net, you know,
Right.
college level.
That's actually a great point. Why are freshmen in high school playing on the same height nets as international Olympians? Right? Like that just doesn't. Does that make sense? That doesn't sound like it makes sense. So even if it's not a dramatic change, those couple inches will make a big difference, just in terms of strategy and how that game is moving, especially once you get collegiately, I would think. You know, internationally, they're jumping much higher and the ball's not crossing right at tape level.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas collegially, even the good jumpers, with a few exceptions, we're driving the ball pretty close to tape level. So that little difference in net height will probably cause people to have to adjust what they're doing. So, but yeah, I'm fine with keeping it in high school. It's high school. At some point, high school is about participation and playing.
Yeah. That's why they give us the 18 subs. You know, I mean, at least my view. And I look at it and go, you know, I remember, if nothing else, depending on the set, if we don't true up the sets, because if you took us all the way back to 6 subs, you know, my participation level is going to go down significantly. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's just that it would be something we'd have to deal with. But I remember when I was working at club, they asked me to go work with another coach, and she's like, I'm trying to get everybody in, but I keep running out of subs. I said, well, what are you doing? And she says, well, I use my libero, but then I sub for this and I sub for both my outsides. And I just said, look, how are your outsides? She said, well, they're all pretty much the same. How many do you have? Four. I said, play two in set one and two in set two, and make sure you alternate them so they don't feel like they're not starters, because some parent will go, why aren't you starting in game one? And, you can figure that one out. But she just didn't know. And that's something we probably ought to teach, especially if we're running 6-2s and 6-3s and things like that, management of that is pretty simple if you know what's coming. But until you shoot yourself in the foot a couple times and then ask another coach, it ought to be kind of part of the basics. And yeah.
I was coaching in a tournament a couple weeks ago, and that very similar scenario happened. It was a coach who ran a full 6-2, so subbed both setters, and then he subbed for one of his outsides, and it was for whatever reason, it was an incredibly high efficiency side out game. He was out of subs. I believe it was at 14 points.
Wow.
He was completely out of subs, and it was just like, man, you only get 2 rotations when you only have 12 subs. Like, you're not gonna, you can't burn through it. And if they side out effectively, you're now toast, because you didn't pay attention to that and you didn't start looking at it from a standpoint of, hey, let me figure this out so that I can at least do what I want to do. Whereas, Federation, you can go a whole nother set. And I agree on that, right? When you look at, we always see the participation rates of high school into college, and 7% or something like that of athletes go play from high school into college. Well, there should be a reason for that, and high school should be about participation. And there are hundreds of schools in this country that are never looking to put kids into college to play sports. They're just looking to do things to enrich their kids, and give them something to do and some way to represent their town or where they're from. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm actually okay with the 18 subs in high school. That doesn't phase me in the slightest. High school, you'll also see like 30-person rosters. You don't always see that in other places. Collegiately, man, we make our own beds. If we can't figure out how to get kids playing time, that's probably our fault for recruiting poorly.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Jim. I think that's one thing that I like about having the 4 different rule sets in the United States and modifications to those rule sets on top of those. Um, Internationally, we don't have as many. Most of the other countries play with pretty standardized FIVB rules. But that the participation thing is the biggest, I think. I think we do, particularly on the women's side, see that sometimes our international left side hitters are we don't have the large stock of great
Right.
outside hitters that are 6 rotation players, because we're not, we don't have to develop them in college because of the subbing. But I'm all for having a better game. If we can sub a little bit and have a little bit higher quality game, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that to me is just one of those things where it's just a huge change of strategies for coaches who typically will do multiple things, right? How many coaches do we know that only coach in one rule set? There's, by the way, the only ones who probably do are probably college coaches, but a lot of high school coaches and a lot of club coaches certainly are intertwined with multiples. And there's probably a lot of college coaches who also have to deal with club rules. So it's just has to change your strategy as you're moving along.
The other one that comes up a lot is should we do away with rotation or the overlap rules? Could we just keep the same 3 players in the front row, the same 3 players in the back row, and not do any rotating or not worry about overlap, similar to beach rules when you're playing quads or doubles? We don't have those types of issues. How do you think, and that would be a major change? How do you think that might be taken by the volleyball fans?
Well, that'd be interesting. I personally wouldn't like it because I think it would take away from creativity, right? So you have to, half of the game at times is identifying who's who and what's where. If that doesn't change, if that's always the same, you don't need to change that. But you think about the oh God, I think it was the U.S. men's team during the '80s where they'd run their swing offense. They'd drop a middle or an outside right in the middle of the court, and then go left side, go right side, and having to figure out what they were going to be doing off of that serve receive. I think you would lose some of that creativity if you always had those three people in front row. Plus, you don't have I don't want to say the weakness of having the one less front row attacker by having a setter in front row. So I probably wouldn't like that. I can see where it is. I think 9-man volleyball does that. I think
Yeah.
they have set front rows and back rows.
Yeah.
But that's a very different game. But yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I don't know how people would view that. I personally wouldn't like it just because I think it changes too much of the dynamic, and I think that would drive even further into specialization that I wouldn't love.
I'm smiling because I got invited to play 9-man in Chinatown, New York, years ago by a friend of mine. And lo and behold, I was the left front all day, which, and I didn't have that great. I've never been that great a player, but relatively speaking, I fit in well there. That was great. It was a great experience to see something different. The interesting thing about, I never really thought of it. First of all, I've just gone through, and I'm in the middle of going through, teaching a bunch of brand new guys how to stay in rotation, how to play a 6-2, how to do all of those things. And it takes a lot of our training time, which is not a bad thing. It's, when we show parents all the decisions their kids have to make, they don't really understand, until we kind of show them. We try to do a little bit of that. But I could see it being the other way. I could see if you started and it basically said you can do what you want. You can start where you want, probably differentiate front row from back row only, maybe. And again, that might change as well. But you could see kind of like pre-snap movement in the NFL. You could see the offense actually get creative and say, we're going to start here, but we're going to actually be moving on the serve. So you don't know where we're putting folks. And, in essence, the swing offense, if the rule was you can be anywhere, you could see all kinds of interesting formations and things like that come out of it. So I would be interested to see, once people had that set, how they would adapt to it and how they would exploit it, because that's what we do.
Well, but back to the unintended consequences that BJ mentioned before. Would the unintended consequence be teams not needing as many players, right? Would now all of a sudden, instead of me needing to carry 4 middles on my roster to make sure that I'm deep enough and can sustain injuries or whatever else, because I need 2 on the court at all times and we need a backup, instead of carrying 4, do I now only carry 2 because I only have 1 front row middle all the time? And I now all of a sudden load up on defensive players and I've got 15 liberos on the roster? Obviously, I'm making that up.
Yeah.
But does that change the makeup of what we would be looking for and what people are training for? So I don't have an answer. That'd be an
I think that's
interesting ask.
It's probably. I mean, again, what that would be dependent on what people saw. And you'd have the innovative coach that's trying something really wacky and people would go, and then you'd have the coaches who are more, copying the last thing they saw. And I'm guilty of that plenty of time, that would recruit in, kind of one way. But yeah, if you recruited less, it probably would make your recruiting more important, to get that right 1 or 2 middles. That the mediocre middle might, or setter or whatever position you're looking at, might be devalued, and it probably would be less players. But kind of have to see. Could be interesting. I don't know that I'd like to see it go that way, but then again, that's just me clinging on to what I've been teaching, and that's probably not the best thing either.
I'll take that a step further, though. Does it take the offense, and now all of a sudden, instead of you having, as I mentioned before, 4 attackers on 3 hitters because you're taking out the center and the libero, if you have a guaranteed front row and back row, now all of a sudden you have 5 attackers on 4, or on 3 blockers. I'm sorry. So does that make it even harder? Does that all of a sudden become far more difficult to defend because now you have, by definition, 2 free attackers every single time? So I don't know. It'd be interesting, but yeah.
Yeah.
Steve, we're up against our hour. Do you have any last thoughts, or are we going to wrap it up for the day?
Well, a couple things. One, every time we have Jim on, I get to, question things I already do, which is great. My guys are already communicating differently after our last discussion. We've been emphasizing the pre-point communication, and we only call mine on free balls now, so people can release. I'll say that, or balls that are slow enough that 2 people are going to go for them, kind of thing. I'll relate my fun story. I've got a new young player who's at that awkward freshman age, and we had to take him along for our scrimmage last week. We put him out there, and we had taught him, hey, get there, face the hitter, and our opponent's best hitter just ripped one cross court and just hit him, and it popped up and went to where we needed it to go, and we played the point, won the point, and I don't think he even knows what he did, but the being in the right place, doing kind of his read beforehand, overcame his skill at contacting the ball because the ball found him. And I think that was really a fun thing to see. The guys celebrated it like crazy, and it helps with his confidence. And so I think, Jim, thanks for the last time. This time, yeah, there's a lot here. If I come back from it, other than getting rid of the screening rule, the double's going to be interesting to watch. I just think we would have a lot less chatter on VCT if we got rid of screening, because it comes up about once every couple of weeks. And I understandably, but it's just like, okay, maybe we just get rid of that. But that's all I got. But thanks, Jim, and we'll have you back because these are always great discussions.
I was going to say, I'll say 2 things. Is first, as coaches, if we got rid of screening, we would just find something else to complain about.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's what we do. And then the other thing, and this is one of my great moments, and I know, BJ, you'll appreciate this. So I am very big on being positive, right? You can't focus on the negative. Your goals and things can't be, I'm not going to do this. It has to be, I'm going to do this. So I have a club team that I'm working with, and the first couple of weeks of the season, as we're going through goals, and they started giving these negative goals. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. I was like, those aren't really great goals. So I don't know, maybe the 4th week into the season, I couldn't be there. So the head coach was there, and they had another team doing goals with them. And during the other team doing goals, somebody said, I'm not going to do X. And my whole team is like, you can't give a negative as a goal. And that to me was one of my favorite moments as a coach in recent memory, because they're listening. They're actually, a couple months more down the line, they're actually really starting to understand why that is and why that's different. So it's exciting to see those things. And that was, to your point, Steve, like you don't always know why you're doing it, but you're in the right place at the right time, that good things happen. It's the same thing. So it was exciting.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
So great. Appreciate you guys' time.
Cool.
It's been fun.
Well, we'll be back next week, BJ. We'll talk this week, and maybe we'll get together to test a little bit of technology here. Jim, thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. You guys have a great weekend.
See you later.